Good morning. We are Memhei Amud Beis 45b. So before I go forward, we left a couple of unanswered questions yesterday. And Rabbi Gimel was kind enough to do a little reading for us and share his findings. So I didn't look up any of the sources that he sent me, but I trust his ability to read and transmit. So the first question was, what's the halacha on two cities that are equal distance? And the way we had it, the Gemara presented only one option here, and Rashi gave us the alternative one, right? The option the Gemara gave us was the opinion of Rabbi Lezer, which is that you could measure exact, and therefore each city is required, and thus there would be two eglarufas. Rashi gave us the alternate, that the two cities would bring together and they would make a condition. If our city is closer, this belongs to us, and if your city is closer, it belongs to you. Now, there's a third opinion, apparently, which is that neither would bring, because you could measure, and Torah says closest in the singular. Right? Rabbi Lezer understood that the word closest could be plural, as in we're describing a singular entity that can contain multiple closest. But if I understand closest to mean the singular, and I maintain that you could get an exact measure, then neither city would bring. So this is a third view, which in and of itself, we have to ask ourselves why Rashi doesn't bring that view, why Rashi chooses to only give us one alternate view, not another alternate view. Can think of why that is, but just putting it out there. At any rate, Rambam rules that Rambam rules that he right, if I'm understanding correctly, is the view that Rashi brings it, the alternate view that Rashi brings it, which is that they would bring in partnership and then they would make the condition, which is not the way Rabbi Lezer, the way the Gemara tells from Rabbi Lezer here. So it's the alternate view, and it's because the Gemara elsewhere raises the other view. Okay. The other question was about Jerusalem. We said that we don't bring an Eglah Rufa from Jerusalem, so we asked, well, what if the closest city is Jerusalem? Do we not do the procedure? Or do we go to the next nearest town? Rambam rules go to the next nearest town. Okay. We just don't go to Jerusalem. Now, as far as the head versus the body and where do you bury by the spot of the head or by the spot of the body, and about the question of whether the head rolled or the body rolled, right? That's my question. Yeah. So the Gemara, the Jerusalem Talmud raises the same thing and discusses it with respect to finding a body on a cliff. So was the person standing at the bottom of the cliff, and then because of the blow, the head rolled up? Was the person standing at the top of the cliff and the body stayed in the same spot and the head rolled down? Or the body rolled down, but the head stayed there?
One's on the bottom and one's on the top.
Something like that, yeah. And therefore the Gemara concludes that if the position of the parts of the body look as such that it indicates which one rolled away, then you would follow the one that didn't roll away. But our Gemara makes no distinction. Our Gemara just says, if they're separated, you either go to the body, you go to the head. And Rambam indeed also makes no distinction. So thank you, Rabbi Gimel, for giving us that
but it doesn't discuss measuring after.
No. Remember the discussion of the separation from head to body has nothing to do with measuring. It has to do with where to bury. That was the Gemara's discussion yesterday. That there are two different disputes here, right? One dispute is.
Well, was that definite or was
that was the Gemara telling us because the Mishnah told us two different disputes.
About the burial place.
That's definite, yeah. This is the Gemara's conclusion, right? Yeah, that's the Gemara's conclusion.
Measuring.
Nothing to do. They're two separate issues, right? That was the point the Gemara made yesterday.
No, it just didn't seem like they connected those two together.
The Gemara didn't.
It didn't.
Yes, exactly.
So then it's an issue, right? I'm
not understanding your question.
When do you measure? Do you measure after you put the two together, or do you measure after?
It's irrelevant. Well, you measure from the spot. No, you wouldn't put them together and then measure.
If the body's moving towards the head, then the belly button.
Then but that's only for burial. That's not for measuring.
Well, that's what I wasn't sure of whether it was.
It's for they're two separate discussions. even though it's the same people speaking, and therefore.
But measuring is done after the movement?
No, before the movement.
Before the movement.
Presumably before the movement, certainly.
I'm sure that's.
Yeah, we do before the movement, I'd imagine. But let's see, maybe we'll get the answers as we go along, but yeah, you measure before the movement.
Yeah, if they're two separate issues.
Yeah, exactly. So now the Gemara gets to that third dispute, that the fourth clause of the Mishnah, the fourth clause, which discuss from which part of the body do you measure. So the line begins with the word gufa, and then the fifth word after the colon is me'ayin hayu moedidin, and then there's another colon. Looking at the screen right here. Yeah. So me'ayin hayu moedidin, that's the fourth dispute, the fourth clause in the Mishnah, which is the second dispute, I should say. It's the second dispute, the fourth clause, which is from which point in the body do you measure? The Gemara gave us three views. One view, which was who's speaking? Rabbi Eliezer said from the navel, from the stomach. Rabbi Kiva said from the nose, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said from the place of where a person would become a cholol. Right, cholol is a corpse, but specifically struck down by iron. So that would be the neck. So stomach, nose, or neck. Okay. So before the Gemara gets to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's view, which is that you measure from the neck, he explains himself. He says, why from the neck? Because the Torah calls this corpse, this unresolved murder, a cholol. And a cholol specifically describes a corpse that's been struck down by metal. And usually someone is struck down by metal from the neck. So his reasoning to measure from the neck is self-explanatory from the laws of Eglah Rufa themselves, from the fact that the Torah describes it as a cholol. The question becomes the other view. The other two views, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer. One says from the stomach and one says from the nose. Why is that? What's their thinking? So explains the Gemara. The Mai Kamifili, in what is rooted their dispute as to whether you measure from the navel or from the nose.
Both like midpoints, right?
Well, let's see. Mar Savar, one person is of the view, Iker Chayusa, the primary life of the person is ba'apes in his nostrils, in his nose, in his breath. Mar Savar. And the other one is of the view, Iker Chayusa, the primary life, Etibure is in his stomach. That's the question. The question is, where's the primary life? I'm going to translate literally, and then maybe introduce some chassidus in a moment, but let's translate literally for now. So where's the primary life? Is it in the nostrils, in my breath, or in the stomach, in the navel? So Lema, let us suggest, continues the Gemara, Kihani Tanoi, that this dispute as to where you measure from, which is based on where you think life primarily is in the body, perhaps, that parallels another dispute between the sages. And the other dispute is, from which point in the body is the embryo, Vlad is, I was going to say, a fetus formed, or the embryo formed. From which point of the body is the human formed? In the womb. Meirashai begins from the head. This is this view. Now, indeed, we cite to a verse that indicates that the formation of the body is in the head. Because the pasuk says in Tehillim, Mimei imi, from the stomach of my mother, from the womb of my mother, ata goizi, you, quote, goizi. What does goizi mean? So if you open up Tehillim, 71 verse 6. I relied on you from birth. Allah nismachti mi beten. Mimei imi ata goizi. My mother's womb, you drew me. So Goizi here in the English translation, at least the Chabad translation, I guess that would be the basic translation, is drew me. Now, the word Goizi, says the Gemara, can also mean something else. Vaimer, it says, Gize nizrecha vashlichi. Cut my hair and cast forth. I closed the pasuk here, but it's short. Oops, what was that? That's a mistake. My apologies. My back. On my back, yeah, I want to open it up. Here we are. Yirmiyahu, chapter 7, verse, what is it? 29. Here we are. So, Gizri nizreich v'hashlichi. So tear off your diadem, your crown, and cast it off. And here the word for the word for diagram for the crown is the word nizrecha, your crown. But the word described to tear off is gazi. So we see in the Tehillim there, gazi means to draw the body forward, and gazi nizrech to tear off your diadem is a similar word, gizi, to pull out, to draw near, but indicating that this pulling near is in the head area. Right? So here he translates it as a crown, diadem, but I think Rashi in our Gemara translates it as hair. I'm not mistaken. Yeah, or maybe the pasuk itself goes on. No, the pasuk doesn't say hair. Rashi translates it as hair. Either way, the point being that this description of draw near or draw the body out is used to describe the body, the child emerging from the womb, and that same word to draw near is used to describe taking off something from the head, either hair or a crown, thus indicating that the word gizi indicates a pulling out near the head, and thus the baby is formed from the head. That's what the Gemara is. That's this view. Abba Shaul says, and this is modern science would confirm this view, that the fetus is formed from the navel, from the stomach, and it expands its roots, here and there. The body forms from there. In other words, from the original view, which said that it starts in the head and goes downward, you don't have to say cast out its roots. It just starts from the top and grows. But when you're starting from the center, you have to expand in all directions equally. And that's what's described here. Okay, so now, says the Gemara, perhaps these two disputes parallel. Our dispute in our Mishnah, which discusses where you measure from, and that is based on where you believe primary life is in the body, either the nostrils or the stomach. That will tell you which part of the body you measure from. That parallels where the body is formed from, assuming that the body is formed from the spot where primary life is. So if primary life is in the head, it would form from the head. If primary life is in the stomach, it would form from the stomach. This is the Gemara suggesting at the moment. Says the Gemara, actually, no. The place in which the body is formed does not have to measure the place from which life is primarily in the body. And therefore, Afilotema, you could even suggest, Abashol, you could even suggest that you measure from the nostrils, and yet you still maintain, like Abashol, which is the modern science, that the body is formed from the stomach. Namely, Ad Kamloi Kamar Abashol. Abashol only stated his view with respect to beginning from the stomach, only with respect to its formation. Then when the fetus is formed, it's formed from the middle. Or in general, all formation starts in the middle. You start from the center when you form something. But when you describe its actual life, the Kula Alma, he too can agree that it's in the nostrils. Why would he maintain that it's in the nostrils? Because the verse reads, all that has a living soul in its nostrils. And likewise, it describes creation, that God blew into his nostrils a soul of life. So there's formation, and then there's life. Life is in the nostrils, and formation is from the center, from the stomach. And this indeed parallels what we know today. We breathe, and life is in the nostrils, but we know we're formed from the center of the body, from the stomach. Now, first, I mentioned yesterday this is going to be relevant to the issue of heart transplants. Why is that? Because a heart transplant I did a 3-4 part series a couple of months back, going through various different opinions about heart transplants in halacha, whether you can or can't do it, in different opinions. I welcome you to watch it online. It's quite lengthy and quite in depth. But in very brief, the question comes down to, is heart transplant life-saving or is it murder? Why would it be murder? Because in order to do a heart transplant successfully, the heart that you're taking has to still be beating. So how do they take a heart when it's still beating? Well, because they declare the person dead with the brain dead. So if the brain stopped functioning, so the person's heart's still beating, they'll take the heart out and put it into someone else. So it's either murder, even if the person is going to die in 10 minutes from now, it's still technically murder, or it's life-saving because you're saving someone else's life. Now, this Gemara is actually raised, this question is raised here, because here the Gemara indicates that life primarily, even if you're of the view that it's in the stomach, but certainly if you're, as we rule, that it's in the nostrils, then as long as there's still a person still breathing, I'm sorry. Remember, on the contrary, this actually can support the other view, because if the person's not breathing, but the heart's still beating, then you can take the heart because the person's life is gone because he's not breathing anymore. But there's another Gemara which indicates otherwise, that you have to, when a person's under the rubble and you're not sure if he's alive or dead and you're digging him out on Shabbos, at what point can you say the person's dead and stop digging? Then you keep on going to see if his heart's beating also. Right? And that's where the Gemara, it also depends how you learn that Gemara as well, whether life is in the heart, whether the person's still alive or if his heart's beating. So this is relevant to that subject, although this is not a conclusive final statement, and I encourage you to go, if you want to look at it in depth, to watch those videos, that whole series. Okay, now as far as the Chassidus goes, and perhaps we can discuss here what the Gemara is discussing. So we learn in Tanya that a Jew has 2 souls. We discussed this on Kislev, what that means, 2 souls, and not just Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov, good inclination, bad inclination, but actually 2 souls, 2 sets of conscience. And 2 sets of conscience essentially are biological conscience. We'd call that the animal soul. These humans are just sophisticated animals. And it's a biological sense of self. I want to survive, I want to live. Just like every other biological creature on the planet. And then we have the godly soul. And the godly soul is not out for survival. The godly soul is out for connection to Hashem. And the mission in life is the marriage between these 2. That my livingness as a human being, as a biological creature, should be infused with the godly soul's urge to serve Hashem. That's what mitzvahs are. That's what Torah is. That's what everything we do is. We eat, sleep, and drink, and do everything, all for the purpose of serving Hashem. So we're doing ordinary, so to speak, biological activity, but doing it in such a way that's godly. Eating, but eating kosher food. Eating with the intention of serving Hashem. Right? Marriage, children, but with the purpose of serving Hashem, and so on and so forth. That's the objective, essentially, of life. Because the godly soul was doing just fine before it came down to this world. It was connected to God already. It came down to this world so that the human experience, the animal soul, be infused with godly energy. So it follows, therefore, that just as it is with the creation of first man, so it is with the creation of every man. Man is created unlike other creatures that are created in one shot. God says, let there be animals, and a living cow emerges. He doesn't create a cow and then put a soul into it.
It's the chicken and the egg.
What he's created is, well, the Torah actually, it would seem actually that the chicken and the creator were created both simultaneously. Hashem created the world in its completion, which would mean, I'm assuming, that both chickens and eggs are created simultaneously as a complete entity. Just on that funny question, whether which one came first. But anyway, it's just my thinking. The point is that the Torah describes creation of animals as a singular creation. Let there be animals, and all the animals emerge as a living creature because their life is singular. It's just biological. With man, it's different. First, God formed man from the earth, and then he blows into his nostrils a soul of life. So it's two separate entities here. First, he's created as a biological creature, and then we infuse into the biological creature the true life of a connection to Hashem, godly soul. Right? Right. Now the question then becomes, who is the primary person? Who is the primary person? Is it the animal soul, which is what he's created with first? And the same thing is true as we're learning now. The same thing is parallel. Oh, I missed to make an important point. The Alter Rebbe describes that the animal soul is primarily in the heart, and the godly soul is primarily in the brain. Why is that? Because the heart, let's just make, for the purposes of this conversation, the heart and the upper body, what do we call this?
Torso.
The torso, as the primary dwelling home for the animal soul. Why is that? Because emotions are driven by I. I love, I hate, I'm afraid. Sorry, iPhone. Yeah. It's primarily driven by I. And that's the animal soul's biological experience, I. So where's the brain come in for a biological creature? I'm going to use the brain to get what I want. So the brain, from this perspective, is in service of the I, the heart. The godly soul, he describes, is in the brain and the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart is when it's oxidated. So it's less I, because the I is in the blood. I'm here. The oxidation is a little more softer version of emotions. So it's the brain and the heart. Why primarily the brain? Because pure intellect doesn't say, what do I want? Pure intellect says, what is the truth? That's the godly soul's experience. What is the truth? And therefore I feel for it. It doesn't start from I. It starts from what's the truth. And then the truth says, this is the right thing to feel for. Right? So it starts in the head versus the heart. And this is perhaps the discussion here. Where's the person formed from? Is he formed from the godly soul and then given an animal soul to work with? Or is he primarily created as an animal soul and then we inject into him a godly soul? Created from the stomach and then we inject into him life, the godly soul, the life that's in the nostrils. And indeed, that's how man is created at the beginning and how we're created today. You start out, man is created from the earth as a biological creature. And then Hashem infuses into him the godly soul. And the same thing is true of person. He's created from the stomach. From there, the rest of the body is formed. And then into that is put life, a godly soul. And indeed, this is, the Gemara says that the Yetzer Hara, his claim comes first. Because the godly soul only fully manifests in the body at bar mitzvah. From birth, the person's natural state of being is the animal soul. Because a baby is born. Babies are very cute, but they're also very selfish. Babies know one thing. I'm hungry, feed me, change me, pick me up, scratch me, burp me, put me to sleep. It's all, the baby's just me. And as a baby matures, and parents hopefully do a shtickle job at this, of maturing the child, and the child starts to learn, you're not the center of the universe. It's not me. Right? Now Rebbe writes in his second version of the Shulchan Aruch, of which we only have a few chapters, but in there he describes that the godly soul emerges in the body slowly. It starts out at the bris. That's the first time the ego is softened, the bris. And as he develops more and more, and the child's less and less ego self-centered, less animal soul-centered, becomes the godly soul is more and more manifest until bar mitzvah age. Now the godly soul is fully manifest in the body. You can focus on not a selfish being, but on Hashem. So the godly soul comes second. From every experience, the godly soul comes second. Because our natural default state is I exist. And then we introduce, well, I'm here to serve Hashem. But the natural default is I. In fact, we say it every morning in our davening. And Tanya points this out. We say every morning, Elikai, God, neshama, shenasata bi, the soul you gave into me, tahoida he is pure. So we say the soul you gave into me, which means I exist before you gave me my soul. So who's the I talking here? The animal soul saying that you gave into me a pure soul. But me, who's the me? The animal soul. Right? So therefore, from formation, at formation, the animal soul is first, the body's first, the stomach is first. But what's primary life? Even if the person, by his selfish version is, or his conscious version of himself, is the I, the selfishness, the animal soul. But even that Yid, at the core, what is he really? What's really his life? His godly soul. Really, his life is at the nostrils, even though he was formed at the stomach. Even though his default conscious version of himself is animal soul, biological, selfish, I serve myself, but really, really deep down, what's his life? His godly soul in his nostrils. When push comes to shove, we want to get to who's the core of the Yid. It's true, his whole life, his conscious self is running. But at the end of the day, you push a Yid against the wall, you put a gun to his head, and you say, Jew or not Jew? If you say Jew and shoot me, I don't care, I'm Jew. I'll give up all my biological self because I'm a Yid. It's the core. Life is the godly soul. So at life, described from the nostrils, even though from formation, it's the animal soul of the body, perhaps.
Did Rambam rule that the measurement to the nearest city is from the nose, so we didn't get there?
The indication from the little citations in the Mishnah indicates that we measure from the nose. You want to say something before?
You covered it. It's about where do you measure from? Is it from the godly soul?
So it seems at the end you measure from
like the godly soul.
It seems, yeah. So even though, that's what I'm saying, even though consciously speaking, the way he's formed as a human, it starts from the stomach, it's the animal soul. But the end of the day, when the push comes to shove, the Yid's life is connection to Hashem. Even if the way the Alter describes it is, in chapter 19, he describes this enigma of Jews who are not educated, not indoctrinated, but give their lives for the sake of Hashem, as has unfortunately been the reality of our history. And he explains, even though this person had the entire life, he was controlled by his selfish urges, but deep down, latent within him, there was a part of him that was inherently and intrinsically connected to Hashem. And the rest, most of his life, he's ignoring that and thinking, yeah, I'm still a Jew. Okay, so I'm misbehaving, I'm doing this, that, and the other, I'm still a Jew. But then when his very Jewishness is put in the line, he comes roaring back and saying, everything's out the window because I'm a Jew. And if it means give up my life, so be it. Because at the end, push comes to shove, it's the godly soul that's life. It's the breath of life that God blows into our nostrils, and not the formation that comes from the stomach, the body, the animal soul. Okay. Let's conclude this Gemara before we get to the Mishnah tomorrow, the next Mishnah. So the Gemara now cites the third view, which is Rabbi ben Yaakov. Rabbi ben Yaakov says, "Mimakim shenasa chalol mitzavadoy." Rabbi ben Yaakov says you measure not from the stomach nor from the nose, which, as we discussed earlier, is a question of who's the real person. Is the real person the breath of the soul that's at the nose, or is it the selfish I, the stomach? But Rabbi ben Yaakov goes in a different direction. He says, well, we just measure from the spot at which he became a corpse. Where was he struck down? And chalol is described as someone who's cast down by iron, which ordinarily is ordinarily struck in the neck.
The head.
Sorry?
Off with the head.
Yeah. My time with Rabbi ben Yaakov, what's the reason of Rabbi ben Yaakov to conclude that becoming a chalol, becoming a corpse of this type, is specifically by the neck? Because he cites to a verse in Yecheskel, which reads, Lases oischa al tzavore chalale rishoyim. I pulled it up also over here. Let's find it.
To lay upon the necks.
Hold on a second. I thought I pulled it up.
Slain.
I didn't pull it up. What is it? Say, read it again.
To lay you upon the necks of the wicked who are to be slain.
Yeah, it's a pasuk.
Which shows
Yeah, I think it's talking about the end of the Rishonim. How you're gonna overpower them, and therefore it's described there as the necks of the chalol, the corpses of the Rishonim, and therefore the corpses is connected to the neck, in this description of chalol. So what perhaps is the chassidus about the neck, and why a person becomes a corpse, so to speak, from the neck?
Stiff-necked people.
The neck in chassidus is called the meitzer hagorin, the constraint, the narrow of the neck. What's the narrow of the neck? So we just finished describing that the godly soul is primarily in the mind, which asks, what's the truth? The animal soul is in the heart, which says, I want. Now, a lot of times a person can have cognitive dissonance, where his mind says, I know this is the truth, but my heart says, I want something else. And there's a lack of communication because of the narrowness of the heart, of the neck. In Kabbalah, it's called Meitzir HaGorer. The constraint of the neck, the narrowness of the neck, doesn't allow for the head, which understands what the truth is, to communicate to the heart and say, well, therefore you have to pursue that. And the heart's in one direction and the head's in another. So where Rabbi Ben Yaakov says, whereas you guys are measuring from who he is, I'm measuring from where the problem is. And the problem is the disconnect between the two people you're describing. You're describing the head and you're describing the heart. And you're asking which one's the real one. The real person aside, the failure was in the neck. And the lack of communication between the two people you're describing here. The lack of communication between the head and the heart. And that's where we're measuring from. So we have like three views here. Measure from the person. Well, who's the person? Is godly soul or is an animal soul? And the third view is whoever the person is, what should really be happening here is a symbiotic connection between the two. And the issue here is that he's struck at the neck. He doesn't have a relationship between his godly soul and his animal soul. They're both doing very well. And we learned Chassidus, he's flying, wow, this is amazing stuff. Then 2 months later, he says, well, I want that. The neck has been severed. He's been struck at the neck instead of the passageway being open. So there's good communication between his mind and his heart. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we get to the Mishnah which describes the next proceeding. Because everything we said till now is about the measuring, right? We described where you find the corpse. We described what kind of corpse. We described how you find him. Now we described the measuring. We described who from Jerusalem comes out to do the measuring. And now that the measuring is done, the Mishnah is going to go on to describe what happens from there. Right? The elders from the city come out, they wash their hands, they say the whole proceeding. That's going to be continuing in the next Mishnah. Have a wonderful day, Eden.